And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jamie Wojciechowski.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's been an interesting one for me. I guess we have two topics, but I do want to check in kind of first to see how's the first 8 days of your New Year been.
The first 8 days of my New Year have been actually, for me personally, pretty good. I've spent some time really trying to be mindful about what kind of reviewing the last year that had passed. I really hadn't done that much before. I actually found this really awesome workbook online, this free workbook called Unraveling Your Year. And it's like pretty long workbook, but it was cool because I actually was able to like sit through and kind of review and realize how many things that I had seeds that I had planted at the beginning of 2017 that actually did come to fruition and things that I had worked on. Because I think when we're in the moment, it's hard to see where you've come and kind of what you've done to get there. So actually, I had a pretty nice first week of just kind of going through and doing some 2017 review and then setting some intentions for this first quarter of 2018. And I went to a really cool vision board creating event, which was really nice. So mine has been pretty good. How about yours?
Um, yeah, it's been I guess interesting, very reflective
Yeah.
in ways I wasn't expecting. I think the first couple days of the new year were pretty typical. You're kind of analyzing like where you're at, where you want to go, and then 2 days ago, I actually lost a friend in a car accident. So it's been very
So
reflective still, but just it's just interesting, and it's in a way that obviously I wasn't expecting, and it's kind of reflecting on uh, just kind of different things than I mean, life just throws things at you, and then you kind of adjust, and it's just yeah. Mm.
yeah. I'm sorry to hear about that loss. That it,
So
it, it does kind of shift what you think about and just kind of yeah.
right, and it was just in the context of it, it was I don't even know what I want to say. It was just there was a moment that happened that was just interesting because the last time uh, he his name was Michael, and he was in my friend group of people who do stunts, and we had a big kind of stunt holiday party. And the last thing he said before he was leaving was that in the new year he wanted to make sure we all started hanging out outside of just doing stunts and doing work stuff. So
Yeah.
just in the context of that, it's just interesting to have. I think a very fine because it was I mean, a car accident is always sudden,
Right.
so it just yeah, it's just it makes you. I'm normally not big in New Year's resolutions, but this kind of mm, is forcing me to have one. In that, to kind of honor him, I want to make sure that I'm doing that. So that's kind of been
Yeah.
that is I guess my New Year's resolution for this year is just to honor him by making sure that I am kind of building those friendships and those connections outside of just working and just training, because it is, I mean, you spend so much time. I mean, we spend a minimum of 6 hours a week together training, and then there's a connection there because you're doing something together, but there's also so much you don't know about the individual because you're not connecting on a deeper personal level. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget when you are spending a lot of time with someone to analyze it of what kind of time it is and what additional time or less time needs to be done to kind of nurture the relationship in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, to the topic, the first thing I wanted to discuss was corporate mindfulness. I recently have been reading a lot of articles kind of analyzing the trend of corporate mindfulness, and we're seeing, I think, a lot in the last 5 years, but we started to see it kind of in the last 10 years of more businesses kind of uh, having mindfulness resources for employees.
Yeah.
And I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I think mindfulness has so many benefits that it is great that that is offered to help um, people be more mindful. But I also see it being used as a tool to up productivity and increase the bottom line as opposed to it being solely a way to help the employees. So I kind of struggle with that side of it. So I'm just curious how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure, and it's something that, like, for me, I thought about this years ago when I was working in bigger organizations and in large organizations. I remember thinking at different times, gosh, I wish there was a way that as a whole, this company could become more mindful, that there would be more resources around this, and kind of recognizing, because I was learning as a clinician about mindfulness, and kind of learning that that was something that that there was definitely a kind of a global need for that. And so it's interesting to me because it's something that I had thought about when I was in a different work environment. But I also, so on the one hand, I think that, any way that we're exposing people to the topic of mindfulness and concepts of mindfulness, I find beneficial. I think that it's helpful to have that conversation and to bring that into the workspace for sure. But I also I struggle with how it's being implemented, some of kind of the authenticity around it, and what you said as well, kind of that the intention behind it, and kind of what they're really actually wanting to do. Because I think that it's going to change it's going to change what the product, or I don't even want to call it a product. Like, the fact that I'm even calling it a product bothers me, but it changes the experience when there's a different intention behind it. And so I struggle with that as well. So it's something that I'm definitely seeing a lot more of in just really big companies. Like in the article that you sent, Aetna has a mindfulness resource officer, I think the person is called. And different companies do it differently. So some companies actually have people who are trained mindfulness instructors come in and do this, and then other places or it's maybe somebody who has more of a marketing background. So it's challenging, because I think that I think we're recognizing that, like, just mindfulness as a concept is becoming a product in a way, and so with that, we're going to see more of it being used in different ways, and kind of having to be, I think, a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
critical or mindful ourselves about what it actually is and what you're actually getting out of it.
Right,
And
and it's interesting because this is also a debate that goes beyond just corporations in the mindfulness community. Because for any of our viewers or listeners who don't know kind of the historical context, is the whole idea of I guess meditation being practiced by non monastics is relatively new.
right.
For most of the history of Buddhism, lots of Hindu sects that do a lot of meditation, it was really restricted for monks and people who were living a monastic life. And I think the reason for that is that a lot of it within the context of its origins is very, and I don't want to say anti, it's very counter to um, lay life, to kind of the
Yes.
corporate
Yes.
structure, to capitalism. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. It's just that the context of mindfulness within its roots was very much on simple living and getting rid of the ego and materialistic attachments.
Mm-hmm.
So there's automatically kind of a dissonance that happens when you try to introduce that into a normal society that does function in I mean, I think any just normal society, because I think you'd have the same problems if we had a socialist society, if we had some kind of mix. No matter what kind of society it is, I think it's just once you have power structures and a government and any kind of thing in there, it's kind of somewhat dissonant to it. And at the same time, it's clear that you don't need to be a monk meditating 20 hours a day to find benefits. So I think it's about the balance, and because it's so new, specifically in the West, I think we're still trying to find it.
Right.
And I think because it's integrating slowly and people are just kind of discovering it now, I think it tends the tool tends to be used often in not the best way, because people are still kind of experimenting and seeing what the best way is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's part of it for sure. And I also think that like there is definitely become more of an interest in I don't even know what exactly to call it, but just kind of more Eastern, non Western kind of medical and healing practices overall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's the challenge because I think mindfulness has become a buzzword. It has become one of those words that people are starting to hear and recognize and tag on to things that aren't necessarily mindfulness related, but kind of just but can kind of fit under that full umbrella, but aren't necessarily mindfulness. And so I think there's a challenge because I think that companies and corporations are going to be drawn to continue to do this more because there is more of a need for it, and people are kind of recognizing and I think wanting to live more mindfully in their lives. And yet people spend so much of their life at work and
Mm-hmm.
at their desk and in these meetings. And so, you know, there's definitely, I think people are yearning for having this in their life, and also companies are realizing that this is something that we can offer, that we can provide in some way, in a way to boost the productivity of the company, rather than I think help the overall wellness of the employees or the people who are actually engaging in the mindfulness. And so I think for me, you know, I think that it can be a really it could be a really beneficial thing depending on the motivation behind it and how it's implemented and how it's utilized. And also I think recognizing that, like what you're saying, that meditation and mindfulness is very much counter to our kind of normal system of living. And so I think recognizing that some of the corporate structure also would need to be challenged if you're bringing in this mindfulness program, also kind of challenging what are the expectations of hours that people are working, what are the expectations of sick time, are people allowed do people feel okay to call in sick if they're not well, or do people feel like they can't do that, you know, because of productivity and things like that. And so I think there has to be a balance and identifying, okay, so we're you know, we're bringing in somebody to teach meditation and teach some mindfulness skills, and we're also looking at how our company a whole can help to support that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a way to do it and to really be effective. But I also think, you know, we're really going to see, because like you said, it's still pretty new. So we're going to see probably across the board of how this actually plays out.
Yeah, and I think that's the danger of it. The danger of it is, um, I think in the West, because we're, I don't want to say most, but a good portion of mindfulness as a buzzword, as a practice, in order to be appealing to people in the West, has been stripped of
Mm-hmm.
its spiritual context, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
you end up having two different types of mindfulness. You have the kind of self help
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness that's really about, in a lot of ways, is about the self. It's about dealing with stress and uh, coping, and it's very much about kind of psychological self help. And then
Yeah,
you
like a
have
psychotherapy tool kind of
right,
mindfulness. Yeah.
and then you have mindfulness as a lifestyle, as full spirituality, as a worldview that comes with a rich history and context.
Mhm.
And most of the debates around mindfulness on mindfulness panels tend to be debates around that topic and people from those two different worlds, and
Yeah.
both have valid, I mean, reasons to exist. I mean, I'm clearly on more of the lifestyle because that's what I know. I don't have a lot of rich knowledge of using it in
Mhm.
therapy and as that kind
Right.
of tool. Um, but I think the danger in corporations is that it is seen exclusively, and I understand why it's seen this way. It's seen exclusively as the self-help tool, because you don't want to bring in religious context and all these things into a corporation. I totally get it, but
Mhm.
then the problem arises when it's used as a tool to help employees cope with uh, issues that should be resolved instead of them just coping with. So them needing to be more productive and working overtime and doing all these things that are helping the corporation but are not great
Mhm.
for the employees, and then just trying to add mindfulness onto it to help them cope with having to deal with those things instead
Mhm.
of correcting those things.
Right.
I think is where the problem is. But I think a lot of places are also doing it the way you're saying, where they're incorporating it and they're seeing all these benefits, and then the company's actually making changes of how it functions on a corporate level and how it engages with its employees based on the changes it's seeing by introducing these programs. And I think too, it's beyond just mindfulness, in that, I mean, you can debate the science and the studies and all this stuff about what the actual benefits of mindfulness meditation is in a clinical sense. But I
Mhm.
think anytime a company takes the time to actually bring out a program that is meant to help and benefit the employees, in a genuine way, I think you're going to see positive changes within that company because the company's already making a choice to change and try to make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think going back to what you said about kind of mindfulness as a psychotherapy tool and kind of that distinction of mindfulness meditation as a lifestyle, I come to it from kind of the opposite, right? So I'm a therapist. I've been working for a long time. So I was introduced to mindfulness as a psychotherapy kind of coping skill tool a very, very long time ago, and learned a lot about kind of the clinical benefits of it and how to implement it, and read tons of workbooks and textbooks on it and things like that. And just in the last 3 to 4 years, I've been really, really working to introduce mindfulness into my own life as more of a lifestyle and kind of to merge those two things. And so for me, I see corporate mindfulness and kind of how they're bringing it into corporate work similar to what I noticed with schools, because that's another place that they're bringing in mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
and stripping out the spirituality, the religious part of it, which again makes sense because this is schools, and we don't want to be bringing religion into schools. But I think that the difference with school versus is corporate is, again, there's that kind of bottom line benefit to the company versus if you're bringing it into school and you're introducing it to the students, then there's really no question about the motivation behind it, that it's to help the students versus if you're bringing it into a company, is the goal to make people less aware that they're like uncomfortable while they're working harder and longer and more difficult hours, or is it that we're really trying to improve the company as a whole and the community as a whole and our employees' well-being? And so I think it's going to be just kind of interesting to see how it plays out, because I think that, like you said, a lot of that speaks to the company's culture as a whole, how they're approaching it, and why they're actually seeking to bring this in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting how they what actually started. I was actually very pro, I guess, corporate mindfulness, until I attended a couple conferences, and it was the angle of which mindfulness leaders were trying to sell the companies on these programs. And I totally understand why they chose this angle, but the angle is always, I don't want to say always, but what I had seen, the focus of the angle and the drive of the angle was on the benefits to the company. And yes, they would explain the benefits to the employees, but they really focused on the benefits to the company about improving the bottom line and all these statistics they had that helped the company make more money, as opposed to the focus being on the employees, or even an equal balance. Because
Yeah.
I do think there's a natural thing that if your employees are happy and they love their jobs, of course they're going to do better work and your company is going to do better. So I don't
Right.
think there's a problem in there necessarily being like, oh, introducing this mindfulness and then making more money for the company. I think it's when like we you said, the intent of it, and trying to, and I just, it rubs me the wrong way when it's being sold with the focus being on how the company can benefit dollar wise, as
Right.
opposed to how the employees can benefit, and then therefore the company benefits.
Right, right. Yeah, and I could see that, and it's interesting because I've um, gone to some conferences that had a different kind of spin, but it's also I was
Okay.
wondering like who was the conference kind of for? Like who were they? Who was the audience of the conference? Because a lot of the conferences that I've gone to, where it's bringing mindfulness into work related, it's more speaking to clinicians or people
Right.
who are already kind of self-help, so it's a different audience, so
Yeah,
I'm
this was for business
like
owners, so.
yeah, so for business owners, yeah, I guess it's they're speaking to, or at least the presenters were intending to speak to a specific audience and
Yeah.
kind of tailoring it to that.
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't. Yeah, it was just. It rubs me the wrong way, and it's just. It's a weird. It's a thing I have. I think just from the tradition I come from, of
Mm-hmm.
this of the trying to sell it,
Yeah.
and trying to package it as this sellable corporate capitalist
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Right.
when in the essence of it is the exact opposite. I mean, I won't even go somewhere if they charge a fee for a meditation class. I don't. It's I have nothing wrong. I don't feel there's anything wrong with it or that they are doing mindfulness wrong. It's just not the type of uh, it just it's counter to my personal practice. So
Mm-hmm.
I just find places that don't do that, who are more community based and donation based and stuff, because that's just what I prefer.
Right.
So it's a trigger for me personally.
Right. Right. But I also think everybody's a little bit different as far as what they're kind of used to, and so for
Right.
some people, hearing how something is valuable or kind of making something into like more of a product, and I hate that kind of thinking about mindfulness as like a product, but yet I think that I wonder if that allows it to reach some people in a different way. I don't know if that reach is necessarily a good thing or not, but I just do think that there are people where whereas you're more tuned to like recognizing this isn't kind of like for you that's aversive. For some
Mm-hmm.
people, if things are the opposite, they find that kind of like, well, is this even worth anything if I'm not paying for it? You know what I mean? And so there's kind of that other side to things. So
Right. And I think too, like, uh, as someone who practices mindfulness as a lifestyle, like, there is nothing more I would love than for more and more people to embrace mindfulness and kind of be more mindful. I think the world would benefit. And I mean, I come from the view of having this lifestyle for over a decade.
mhm.
So I already have a worldview that's very influenced by Buddhism and Zen and Taoism and mindfulness practice. So it's 100% what you're saying. A lot of people don't have that. So then how do you connect, and how do you get those people to see the benefits from the worldview that they have. Because I
Right.
can see, even from when I uh, first started practicing, like I can see that a clear journey of how my worldview
Mhm.
shifted.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and before that, I probably wouldn't. The same things that would sell me now on it are probably not what would have sold me then. So,
Right. Right. Well, I know it's going to be interesting to see how this whole corporate mindfulness plays out. I'm just kind of interested to see as you know as we move forward, kind of what happens, because I think that there's going to be more studies. There's going to be more studies, kind of comparing the different programs at corporations and kind of seeing what's actually beneficial, what's actually effective, and what's not. So it's going to be cool to just kind of I'm like a little bit of a research geek in that way. So I like to see what you know what the what actually comes out as things are implemented.
right. Yeah, and if anyone is, I mean, I guess this is homework already, but if anyone is in a mindfulness program at their work, or there's mindfulness resources, I'd love to hear kind of what your experience has been, and how it's going, and how it's kind of been implemented and affecting both you, your family, and the company.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so moving on real quick to a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. The quote is, happiness means feeling you are on the right path every moment, and you don't need to arrive at the end of the path in order to be happy. And I just loved, this is a quote I literally have on my calendar that I have set to pop up on my calendar on January 1st every year,
So
because it
cool.
goes, yeah, it it's a short quote, but it reminds me of the whole discussion kind of we had on New Year's resolutions,
Mhm.
and how I think our overall kind of summary of it was that resolutions can be great, but without kind of a roadmap and being mindful in the moment, and kind of planting seeds in every moment, all it is a resolution, and there's no real path to that place. And really, what's worth it is that journey on the path. And as long as you're being mindful and enjoying that journey, I don't think it really matters if you ever make it there, because you enjoyed the ride. And that's at least how I try to live my life. Of course, I have goals, but I, the reality is I may never achieve those goals, and I may achieve them all. And to me, achieving it just isn't as important as making sure every moment I'm living my best potential to set myself up to potentially achieve those things, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think like we're just very I think we're trained to just be very achievement and kind of goal focused. But what I've noticed with working with people for a long time, in the therapy context, is that when we set our all of our feelings around when we reach that goal, usually when you get there, you don't even feel it the way you kind of set yourself up to. You know what I mean? It's like you get to it and then you're like, okay, yay, I did this thing, and then now you've kind of created some new, farther off next goal for yourself, that like this thing a lot of times you can't even really absorb and feel that happiness that you thought you were going to feel when you got to this thing once you're there. Because when we train ourselves to not actually appreciate the moment but to continue to look outside, then when you get to the moment you're not in it anyway. And so you're already looking outside to the next thing. And so yeah, I think that this quote really just embodies how important it is to connect with the moment that we're in, and to find that joy in the process, and in the work that you do to lead up to that thing, and kind of just all of those little moments of of getting there versus
Mm-hmm.
looking at the destination. I think that, because that's our life. Our life is the getting there. Our life is the kind of those moments that we're working through those things. And so if we can find a way to really genuinely be in that and appreciate that for what it is, then I think that overall you don't even have to look for happiness. It's just kind of
There.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's when I moved to LA is when I started to really kind of dive into this concept because what I was realizing is I was uh, achieving a lot of the goals I was setting, but as soon as I would achieve one, I would have it on to the next,
Yep, there you
right?
go.
And they're never like when you're thinking about the future, you're creating an imaginary world, right? Because it doesn't exist. So you're setting this goal and you're assigning um, emotional ideas and visuals to what it's going to look like, and it's never going to be that just because it's not that's it's reality versus the idea in our head. And I
Right.
think when you're constantly searching for the ideas in your head to be real, you're just destined to be disappointed because they're not. As opposed to once I started really saying, I remember at one point, and I normally do that. I didn't do this year because of everything that's been happening, but I normally do it every year. I make a list of kind of all the things that I have going on in my life and all the things that make me happy in my life. And
Mhm.
then I try to make sure that I'm adjusting kind of accordingly to it.
Yeah.
Um, because then what I found is me being in that place where everything I'm doing every day to as much as I can that's in alignment, that is mindful, that is bringing me happiness and joy. I'm actually setting myself
Hmm.
up better for those bigger goals just to happen.
Right.
And
Right.
and and I'm okay. And the thing is, the big difference for me is that I found that when those goals don't happen, or they change, or they morph into something else, I accept them very freely now because I'm happy now. So if I miss a goal and something else happens, it's like okay, I missed that goal. Now I'm moving on because I'm in the next moment fully, and I'm happy, and I'm in a place that feels in alignment. I love that the term in alignment. That's kind of where I try to find it because I don't think life is not about being all happy and
Mhm.
positive. I think we learn a lot from things being negative and being upset and being angry, and there I fully believe in embracing those emotions as people do happiness and really experiencing them and analyzing them on a personal level. So for me, it's not about finding everything that I do in a day and just doing things that make me happy. It's about doing things that make me feel in alignment with myself and with my environment and the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that term alignment. That's one of my kind of favorite things that I feel like I'm seeking right now and looking for. And one thing about New Year's resolutions, I kind of stopped making New Year's resolutions a few years back. I think that just that term resolution, usually it was I resolved to change this or to stop doing this. And for me, what I've found is that when I set New Year's, whether you want to call it New Year's intentions or, pick a word for the year, something that I want to feel, something I want to claim or kind of pull into my life, I find that that's much more, I find myself much more effective doing it that way rather than like thinking about what I want to undo, an old pattern that I had that I want to stop doing, thinking about a new pattern that I want to bring in, or a new experience that I want to cultivate. And so I think for that, that's kind of similar to that seeking alignment, kind of just looking for where am I where am I being called to go right now? Like where are the experiences? And that's why I again, going back to that year in review, I really liked reviewing 2017 because I was able to look through and think, okay, well, so I've already kind of built up to this point. So I'm already heading in this direction. And how do I kind of continue towards that? Versus just even starting the year off thinking about the things that the habits that I didn't break or the mistakes that I made, last year, and not wanting to focus on that, but wanting to focus on where I go instead.
Right. Yeah, for me, I visualize kind of myself standing on a needle, right? And you're trying to balance yourself on the needle, and you're kind of swaying all over the place to maintain the balance. And that for me is the image of finding alignment, right? Because that's the journey, right? We're always trying to balance ourselves on this thing, and sometimes we fall, and sometimes we completely fall off and have to get back on. But that's kind of the process. And at no point are we perfectly still and aligned and centered. As
Yeah.
soon as we hit that point, we're falling somewhere else and trying to bring ourselves back.
Right.
So, well, what happens for me is that if I set a goal and attach myself to the goal, and the for me the important part is the attachment, where it's like I need this, and that this goal can never change, and all I'm focused on is this goal. What ends up is I just kind of collapse off the needle because I'm not paying attention to staying balanced on it,
Right.
and then the goal is just farther and farther away. Whereas opposed to if I just set the goal and it's there, and let's say it's on the rights, it's to attain it's kind of on the right of me, but now I'm kind of teetering on a little to the left. I then know in the moment, oh, I just need to adjust myself a little bit, and then I'll get closer to that goal. And if
Right.
that goal then shifts and turns into something else, I just adjust accordingly. And then you go through life like that, and it's these mini adjustments that are putting you into the place you want to be, which is in alignment. And
Yeah.
the goals, and sometimes you reach the goal, sometimes you don't, and it's perfectly fine. As opposed to in our culture, I think it's exactly what you said. I think our culture is a goal oriented culture that really labels achievement and success based on having a specific goal and only achieving that.
Hmm.
And then anyone who change, I mean, I've heard it so many times where someone will say like, "Oh, so like, what are your goals?" And someone will say and be like, "Oh, well, they changed, so you must have failed because you had to change them." And it's like, well, that's not the reality of how that that works. We grow as
Right.
people. We grow as societies.
Mhm.
The whole Earth is ever growing and ever changing. So why would our goals and our desires not also change with us?
Right. Right. And with, like you said, that with the ever changing universe, I think that's kind of part of it, is that like I think it's very a little kind of egotistical to think that like we're going to set a goal and we're going to just everything that we do and want to line up with that goal is going to work out in the way that we've planned, and that we won't have to be mindful and make adjustments along the way and kind of look at what's changing, as you were describing, like that needle. That's an image that I describe a lot of times to my clients with going through life walking on a tightrope. And that, like, if somebody's walking on a tightrope and they have that pole balancing, they have to constantly correct and see what is has the wind shifted, what's changed. And so every step you take, you have to find a way to kind of be mindful and take the temperature of the environment that you're in. And so I think that's just kind of that part of being more open to connecting with the flow, and being willing to adjust your goals as things change, because a lot of times things change for the better. What I found when I set a goal for myself is that a lot of times, if I'm really working hard towards that goal, the universe will change things and make a bigger opportunity, or make something for me that I didn't even see for myself. And so if I'm not being mindful and I'm so like laser focused on my plan and my business plan that I set out or whatever, then I'm not going to see those new opportunities or those shifts that may be coming in. And so sometimes plans change because of good reasons, because of lots of different things. And so I think that goal of just kind of being aware every step of the way is really, really important to reaching whatever it is that you want to experience.
Right. And again, for me, I mean, I think all our mindfulness topics at the end of the day come down to balance in a way. And it's for me, goal setting and is very much about that balance between being aligned and having an intention, right? Because if you take the intention away, then also what are you doing? And this is an interesting debate I find in mindfulness and Buddhist kind of uh, communities in general, is this idea of an intention, specifically in Zen, because there's this idea of kind of this nothingness, right?
Right.
But then there's also this importance on intention. And I think it's this counter. There's this. I think there's dissonance in our universe and in how things work. And I think a lot of times as humans, we want to simplify that dissonance and find, well, it's one or the other, and this black and white kind of thing, as opposed to realizing sometimes dissonance is important. And the dissonance I love in Zen specifically is this dissonance between this idea of nothingness and kind of surrender versus having a clear intention.
Yeah.
And I think that is also the balance in what gets people to achieve their goals. They have the goal and they know what it is, but they're also equally focused on setting the conditions to nurture that goal,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what you have to do. And so many people just focus so much on the goal and then aren't setting the
Mm-hmm.
conditions to grow it. I mean, it's a seed, so you are basically planting a seed, and then it's how you water it. I mean, sometimes you don't water it and then it's not going to grow. Sometimes you water it and it's going to be a massive tree. Sometimes you water it and it's just the wrong seed for that environment and it's not going to grow. It's exactly the same as
Yeah.
that. And I think it's just accepting that, and if it's in the wrong environment, go find a seed that fits that environment. That's what it's about. Or move to an environment where that seed can flourish. Those are all your choices, but unless you're self-reflecting and seeing it in the moment and actually analyzing your day-to-day moment by moment behavior and activities, it's hard to do that.
Right. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, that's a good way to start the new year, I guess.
Start the new year. So I feel like we already have some homework with discussing corporate mindfulness, and just have people experienced it? Is that part of their work? Um, and then do we want to check in with people if people have? Well, actually, yeah, I want to check in with people and just see if people do either New Year's resolutions or set some sort of intentions or have like a word for the year. I've been hearing more people doing a word for the year. So I'm just curious of how do you guys reflect during the new year and move forward?
Awesome. Cool. And you can connect with us on pretty much every social media platform. And my personal favorite is our Facebook group, Civil Discourse. And we post the videos in there, and it's a great way for people to kind of engage and share their stories and do the homework if they feel like they want to. We'll always respond and kind of keep the conversation going, so it's fun.
All right.
Okay.
Happy New Year, you guys. We'll see you next time.